Chosen ones, you have felt the weight of this silence. It has lingered like a shadow at the edge of history, pressing upon your heart in restless hours, whispering through storms, and staring back at you in the stillness of the night. This silence was not empty. It was pregnant with intention, a pause before the thunder, a waiting room before eternity's door would open. For ages, kings and prophets spoke of this quiet interval, when heaven seemed restrained and the earth stumbled in uncertainty. Yet you knew deep down it could not last forever. For silence is never the final word of God. The ancients spoke of trumpets that would one day shatter this hush, of scrolls that could not remain sealed, and of voices rising where none had dared to speak. You were not born in this time by accident. There are forces who tremble at your awareness, counsels hidden in shadows that hoped you would sleep through this moment. But you have not slept. You have stirred. You have questioned. And in your questioning, you have pierced the veil that so many sought to keep shut. Look around you. Does the world not appear strained at its seams? Nations teeter, leaders falter, and secrets once locked in vaults now bleed into the open. It is not chaos, it is the cracking of an old order that can no longer stand. Silence, after all, was only ever a curtain, and now that curtain shakes, ready to be torn down by the hand of the one who delays no longer. But you must understand, when silence breaks, it is not a gentle sound. It comes with thunder, with upheaval, with revelation so heavy, it alters the course of human destiny. What you are about to witness has been written since the first stone of creation was laid, but it is you who must carry the awareness, you who must stand ready when the trumpet sounds. The silence ends now. The move of God is no longer postponed. The hourglass has turned, and what is written will surge forward like a flood. And yet what follows the breaking of silence is not simple, not safe. There are truths that will unnerve you, voices that will call you to act, and shadows that will try to drag you back into the quiet. For generations, the world moved under an unseen weight, decisions sculpted in secret chambers, while the masses believed they were free to choose their own path. The hidden hand was careful, patient, and cloaked in silence, weaving its influence into governments, economies, and even the thoughts of ordinary people. Every empire that rose and fell bore the fingerprints of this unseen force, yet few ever dared to question what truly guided the currents of history. The silence was its ally, for in quiet shadows it could mold reality without resistance. But something has shifted. The hidden hand can no longer remain veiled. Its movements, once invisible, are now leaving cracks in the surface for those who are awake to see. You may have noticed it in the sudden collapse of structures once thought unshakable, in the exposure of leaders who spoke one way and acted another, in the unveiling of archives meant never to reach your eyes. The silence that protected them is breaking, and with that break comes the trembling of everything they built. The ancients warned that there would come a time when the concealed would be dragged into the light, not by accident, but by divine design. The veil was never meant to last forever. Even the prophets spoke of hidden counsels that would one day be unmasked, and of a generation who would rise in the middle of their unraveling. You feel it now, don't you? That pull deep within, the sense that you are not only living through history, but stepping into a script written long before you were born. The hidden hand was never content with controlling the surface. It reached deeper into the foundations of belief, the definitions of truth, and the boundaries of what humanity was allowed to imagine. To control thought was always the ultimate power, and for a time they succeeded, but cracks are spreading. The spell is weakening. The silence that once lulled humanity into obedience has become too heavy to endure, and so the hand that once moved unseen now stirs in panic. Exposure is its greatest fear, for revelation does what resistance never could. Once you see the puppeteer, the strings lose their power, but revelation is never the end. It is the beginning of a far greater battle, because the moment you know, you are called to choose, and that choice, once made, will shape what unfolds in the next wave. Long before Shatter, the nations crowned their kings and wrote their laws. There was another order who stood watch over humanity. They were called the Watchers, beings of immense knowledge and authority, guardians appointed to keep balance between the divine and the mortal. Their oath was clear: to observe, to protect, and to guide without corrupting. But oaths can fracture under desire, and in the hidden corners of time, some of these watchers abandoned their vow. What they offered to humanity was not wisdom, but temptation dressed as enlightenment. They descended with gifts that appeared radiant, secrets of power, weapons of war, arts of sorcery, and knowledge of stars that men were not yet ready to map. What was meant to uplift instead corrupted. What was meant to preserve instead destroyed. Humanity, dazzled by such offerings, did not see the snare. The Watchers believed themselves beyond judgment, yet the consequence of broken oaths ripples across millennia. Wars that should never have been fought, empires that rose on the backs of enslaved minds, technologies born out of forbidden fire. All of these can trace their roots back to the rebellion of those who were meant to protect. Ancient scrolls whisper that chains of darkness were prepared for such betrayers, that a day would come when the vaults of heaven would no longer overlook their actions. Yet the silence of ages made many wonder if those words were only myths. But silence is not forgetfulness. Silence is a waiting space, a pause before reckoning. And now the air itself seems to carry the weight of judgment drawing near. The shadows of the Watchers are still present, not as figures in robes of light, but as influences that slither through councils, laboratories, and stages of power. Their ancient knowledge, once forbidden, has resurfaced in modern hands. Humanity builds towers once again, reaching for heights they do not comprehend, echoing the mistakes of their ancestors. It is not merely history repeating itself, it is unfinished business rising to the surface. Whispers say that Yeshua himself spoke of days like these, when hidden things would be shouted from rooftops, and when the actions of those in secret would no longer remain hidden. If that is true, then the unraveling has already begun. The silence that protected the Watcher's influence is cracking. There have always been whispers of a scroll, ancient and veiled in mystery, written in symbols that few could comprehend. It was said to contain the blueprint of what must come, the unfolding of ages, the secrets of beginnings and endings alike. For generations it remained sealed, guarded by silence, as though heaven itself restrained the moment of its unveiling. Those who tried to peer into its mysteries found themselves halted, for the time was not yet ripe. But silence does not last forever, and seals are not eternal. Now, the sense of the unsealing lingers in the air, Around the world, fragments of revelation emerge, documents released that were hidden for decades, prophecies aligning with present events, truths once ridiculed suddenly standing undeniable. It is as if the scroll itself trembles to be opened, as though history has reached the hinge upon which it must turn. The keepers of the old order can feel it too, and their desperation betrays them. What they most fear is exposure, for exposure signals the scroll is no longer theirs to control. The language of the scroll was never meant for idle curiosity. It was meant for the prepared, for those whose eyes could pierce beyond symbols into meaning. Legends tell of the moment when its words would not simply be read, but would burn into the heart of the hearer, transforming them from witness into messenger. The sealed mysteries were never meant to remain abstract. They were meant to ignite action. When silence guarded the scroll, humanity drifted between wars and kingdoms, uncertain of its true destiny. But with the breaking of silence comes the risk and the weight of knowing. To glimpse the scroll is to glimpse responsibility, and responsibility is heavier than ignorance. You may find yourself asking, why this time? Why now? And the answer echoes from eternity, because delay can no longer stand. The words that waited have reached their appointed hour, and if the scroll cannot stay sealed, then every layer of illusion that shielded the world must fall with it. Truth, once hidden, will confront you, whether you are ready or not. But the question that lingers is not whether the scroll opens. It is who will be found worthy to read it when it does. Across the corridors of power, behind the walls of palaces and the glass of boardrooms, there have always been whispers of a presence that unsettled the plans of kings. Some spoke of visions in the night, others of a voice that interrupted their speeches, and still others of an unseen hand that dismantled entire strategies. These were not accidents of fate. They were the echoes of footsteps belonging to one who walks where he is not invited, one whose authority no decree can silence. Yeshua's presence has lingered in the shadows of nations, shaping outcomes even when rulers believed they alone held dominion. History remembers empires that rose like mountains and fell like sandcastles at the tide. The records may speak of rebellions, famines, or invasions, yet hidden within the ruins is the quiet trace of intervention. For Yeshua himself declared that kingdoms of this world rise and fall under the sovereignty of his Father, and none could endure beyond their appointed hour. Those words have always burned like fire through time, though not all dared to hear them. Even now, the shadows stir. Nations gather in secret councils, speaking of alliances, wars, and strategies of dominance. Yet, behind their calculations, an invisible pressure pushes against them. What they build collapses faster than they expect. What they announce loses weight before it can solidify, and their attempts to drown truth end up amplifying it. The footsteps are near again, closer than they realize. The silence that once permitted nations to build unchecked is fading, and with it comes exposure. For when Yeshua's presence manifests, masks shatter. Those who proclaimed themselves untouchable suddenly tremble, and those who believed themselves powerless rise with strength not their own. This is the pattern of history. Silence broken by presence, presence rewriting destiny. But if his footsteps are already echoing, then the world stands at a threshold. The movements of armies and leaders may appear decisive, but what if they are mere ripples of a deeper current? What if the true decision lies not in the hands of rulers, but in whether the world can recognize the sound of footsteps moving in its midst? There is an ancient warning that speaks of a trumpet which will not sound in daylight, but at the darkest hour, when the world is least prepared. Midnight has always carried its own weight, an hour of endings and beginnings, of silence thick enough to suffocate, of shadows at their fullest stretch. It is in this hour that the trumpet waits, not as an instrument of music, but as a herald of upheaval. For when it sounds, nothing remains hidden, and every sleeper is forced to awaken. The silence before it is deceiving. To the untrained ear, the world appears calm, though beneath the surface unrest stirs. Nations pace restlessly, markets quiver, and unseen currents move faster than ever before. Midnight is not only an hour on a clock, it is a condition of the soul. Humanity drifts in distraction, lulled into numbness, unaware that the trumpet is poised on the lips of eternity. When it sounds, the dividing line between ignorance and awareness will cut sharper than any blade. The ancients told of this midnight cry, when oil lamps of the wise would glow while the unprepared stumbled in darkness. It was never about noise, it was about timing. The trumpet waits for the precise moment when silence has reached its breaking point and the balance of history tips irreversibly. And in that moment, there is no negotiation, no delay, no excuse. The trumpet's voice cannot be ignored, and its echo cannot be silenced. Those who have listened closely may already hear faint vibrations like distant thunder rolling through the unseen. Warnings have been scattered across the world, disguised as coincidence, etched into prophetic words, woven into the unraveling of events. Midnight approaches, and with it the sound that will divide watchers from sleepers. But here lies the mystery. The trumpet does not merely signal an ending, it calls forth a beginning. What begins, however, depends on who hears it and how they respond. For to some, its sound will be terror. To others, it will be the long-awaited confirmation that silence has ended. Midnight is closer than you think, and the trumpet rests ready to pierce the darkness. Power has always sat upon fragile seats, no matter how gilded or fortified they appeared. Thrones carved from stone and draped in velvet have carried the weight of kings who believed themselves eternal, yet time has reduced them to dust. Crowns forged from gold and encrusted with jewels have adorned brows that once commanded armies, but history has scattered them into forgotten tombs. What makes the present hour different is not that thrones tremble, but that they tremble all at once, across nations, as if struck by the same unseen force. In whispered circles of power, rulers confess unease. Their decrees falter before they are fully spoken. Their alliances unravel faster than they can be bound. Crowns slip not because of rebellion from below, but because of pressure from above. What humanity often forgets is that no authority exists in isolation. All dominion is subject to a higher order. Yeshua once declared that no kingdom stands divided, and that every throne has its limit. His words, preserved in Scripture and dismissed by rulers, now return like a storm on the horizon. The silence of heaven once seemed like permission for corruption to thrive, for tyranny to grow unchecked. Yet silence was never absence, it was patience. That patience is now expiring, and thrones that stood secure for generations begin to quake, not through visible armies, but through collapses of trust, exposure of secrets, and the erosion of fear that once kept populations compliant. When fear crumbles, crowns lose their luster. Every crack in authority reveals what was hidden beneath. Some crowns were never symbols of justice, but of control. Some thrones were not seats of wisdom, but of oppression. As they splinter, the world stares at truths long denied. Yet in the splintering lies danger, for the fall of one throne often gives rise to desperate pretenders, each clawing for what cannot be held. The air grows heavy with anticipation, as though every ruler senses that their time is shorter than they dare admit. There are gatherings the public never sees, councils convened in silence, where decisions shaping entire nations are whispered across long tables. Men and women of influence sit cloaked in secrecy, believing their strategies will never be known beyond the walls that contain them. Yet within such councils, there is always a presence unaccounted for, one whose authority exceeds all titles and crowns. Yeshua walks even where his name is unspoken, and when he enters, silence takes on a different weight. The council of the bold has always existed, those who dare to imagine themselves as the architects of destiny, who believe their vision is sharper than heaven's decree. Their boldness is not courage, but defiance, a refusal to acknowledge that every throne sits under a higher throne. They draft plans, chart futures, and determine fates as though eternity itself bends to their will. But history records the futility of such gatherings. Empires rise from such councils only to collapse, their strategies undone by forces they could not anticipate. The scriptures once declared that Yeshua's words would outlast both heaven and earth, that no decree of man could erase what was written in eternity. For every council that plotted in secret, a counterweight pressed upon them, redirecting their schemes, unraveling their webs. Even now, the bold meet in hidden places, yet leaks of their plans drip into the public eye. Cracks appear in their unity, and divisions spread among them. This is not coincidence. It is disruption by an unseen hand. The silence that once shielded their assemblies is fading. Where once they spoke freely, now they guard their words, fearing exposure. Where once they commanded obedience, now they sense resistance swelling from the most unexpected places. For every plan they devise, there emerges a disruption beyond their calculation, and behind each disruption, the trace of footsteps cannot be denied. Yeshua moves where he wills, and no locked door excludes him. If the councils of men fear anything, it is this, that their greatest boldness is fragile. Before the authority of one they refuse to name, yet their refusal does not erase his presence. The question is not whether he is in the council, but what happens when his voice drowns out theirs. Across the ages, visions have spoken of a messenger who does not arrive with soft words or gentle countenance, but with fire burning in her gaze, a reflection of the divine will breaking into the affairs of men. She is not bound by the frailty of human diplomacy. She comes as a force that unsettles the comfortable and strengthens the weary. Her presence is a declaration that silence has ended, that the time of hidden things has passed. Fire in her eyes is not destruction for its own sake. It is truth unveiled, consuming illusions that no longer hold power. She has walked unseen in the midst of revolutions, whispered in the ears of those who stood against tyranny, and stood watch when the world trembled under the weight of its own corruption. The chronicles of prophets describe her as clothed in light, bearing authority not of her own, but of the throne she serves. Those who encountered her spoke of fear and awe mingled, for to be seen by such fire was to feel one's soul laid bare. No mask could withstand her gaze, no false crown could sparkle under it. In silence, her role was concealed. But with silence broken, her presence intensifies. The eyes of fire see through the veils carefully, constructed by those who believed they could hide forever. Governments, secret councils, even the corridors of religion cannot dim that gaze. It exposes and refines, stripping away all that cannot endure the blaze. For what is fire, if not both judgment and purification? Legends hint that such a messenger does not move alone. She is part of a greater design, a chorus of heavenly interventions, preparing the stage for the one who carries the final word. Yeshua once promised that light would pierce every shadow, that nothing whispered in hidden chambers would remain unspoken. Her fire is a foretaste of that promise fulfilled, yet fire demands response. Those who behold it must choose, turn away in fear, or step closer and be transformed. The angel with fire in her eyes does not wait for permission. She waits for recognition. And when her gaze falls fully upon the earth, no heart will remain untouched. There are thresholds in history that once crossed cannot be undone. Some are small, personal choices, while others shift the destiny of nations. But beyond them, all lies a gate spoken of in ancient warnings, a gate of no return. It is not built of stone or iron, but of time itself, an appointed moment when silence can no longer stretch, when the hesitation of heaven is finished. Once this gate swings open, no hand on earth can close it, and the path ahead becomes irreversible. The ancients described it as a doorway between ages, a crossing where light and darkness stand face to face. To step through is to confront revelation, to encounter the weight of truths humanity has long evaded. Many have sensed it in their spirit, the unsettling awareness that events are aligning, that something larger than governments or systems is pressing against the fabric of the present. The signs grow louder, the air heavier, as if creation itself strains for release. Those who built their empires on illusion hoped this gate would remain sealed, for beyond it lies exposure. Masks fall. Secrets scatter like dust in a storm. The silence they relied on as cover crumbles, and what they fear most, accountability, steps through with relentless force. Yet for others, the opening of this gate is not terror but confirmation. It is the proof that waiting was not in vain, that the long hush before the trumpet had purpose. Yeshua once declared that narrow is the way that leads to life, and wide the road that leads to destruction. This gate carries that tension. It does not offer a comfortable crossing. It demands decision. Once it swings, neutrality vanishes. One cannot linger between the threshold and the journey beyond. Every soul, every nation must choose its step, for indecision itself becomes a choice. The silence ends not with a whisper, but with the groan of hinges turning on this great passage. The ground shakes as it opens, and history itself bends in response. What lies on the other side is both promise and peril, salvation and judgment intertwined. Every great storm begins with a stillness, every earthquake with a silence that feels almost fragile. The world now stands in that breathless pause, where the weight of what is coming presses down, though the sound has not yet broken. It is the whisper before the roar, subtle but undeniable, a vibration felt in the spirit before it shakes the ground. Those attuned to it already sense the shift, the stirring of forces that will not be silenced any longer. The whisper is not empty. It carries messages too sharp for the unprepared ear. Dreams unsettled, signs repeating, voices rising from unlikely places, all pointing to the same truth. Something immense waits just beyond the threshold. For those who have ignored the signs, it is easy to mistake this whisper for coincidence. But for those who have watched, it is confirmation. The roar cannot be delayed, and the whisper is its final mercy. Throughout history, God has often moved in this rhythm, a gentle nudge before the upheaval, a warning before the unveiling, a whisper before the trumpet. Yeshua himself once told his followers to watch, to stay awake, because the signs would not come with grand announcements, but with subtle cues, like the whisper of leaves before the rush of wind. This is such a moment. Those who dismiss it will be caught unprepared. Those who heed it will not escape the shaking, but will stand ready when the roar breaks forth. The silence has been stretched to its limit, and the unseen councils grow restless, sensing that their time is shorter than they dared admit. The whisper disturbs them because it signals what they cannot control. Their power thrived in secrecy, but a roar shatters secrecy. When it comes, the noise will drown out lies, expose foundations, and demand response from every corner of the earth. And so the question lingers in the air. How long will the whisper last? A moment? A season? Or is it already fading even now as the roar gathers behind it? The ground quivers, the sky holds its breath, and every soul feels the tension, though few will name it.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.